I've been working so hard to get something that people told me that I could get, and I haven't seen anything come to light in what I'm trying to make happen.
So I don't want people to think that, hey, just because AI is here, we don't know where it's going to go. We don't know if it'll keep progressing. But even if it did and it was ready right now, there's still so much opportunity that you need to incorporate that.
What's going on, everyone? This is another episode of the Programming Podcast. So today we had a question submitted where we were basically talking about where people should be investing their time wisely when it comes to, learning how to code and obviously progression. So, and the other aspect too that I think is an interesting angle, because obviously we just finished the Commit Your Code conference, and conversations that I was having even then revolved around, I'm at X level in my organization. I'm trying to see how to get to Y. What do I need to do in that regard? And I think that even revolves around investing in time, where to get your resources or how to audit resources and stuff like that. So I think we should talk about that generally today.
Great, yeah.
So I guess you want to start us off, Leon, on that subject?
Yeah, sure. So we have folks that have been reaching out, especially in the communities that we all come from, and they're saying, hey, I'm trying to break in. I'm trying to understand how I should be spending the little time that I have to either get into tech or, like Danny's saying, to grow and level up to that next stage in tech. And so I guess as someone that's been helping shepherd folks through that journey for the past 10 plus years now.
10 years.
Yeah. I would love kind of what advice would you give them, and what do you think about that, and how do you keep those people's journeys in mind?
Yeah. Well, I don't think that it makes sense to do it intensively. If you've got a job, if you've got kids to take care of, or parents that are getting older that you need to take care of, or if you're just, scrambling to be able to pay your own bills, you're probably pretty busy and you don't have a ton of time and energy to put into this. I think it's much better to pace yourself and plan a little bit longer term, and maybe invest like an hour a day, 7 days a week, rather than spending all day Saturday and all day Sunday, cramming. So there are diminishing returns each day. And so what I encourage people to do is, even if you're not a morning person, try to wake up early. And a lot of people might think, the typical, I'm not saying wake up at 4 a.m. and take a cold shower and go for a 10K and then come back and study. No, I'm saying just get up an hour before you need to leave for work or for school or wherever you're headed, and commit to coding that entire hour. And yes, you're going to need to do your morning routine and everything. Just make sure you've got an hour. And I mean, it could even be 30 minutes, but make sure it's a consistent block of time and you can get into a routine, and then just do that for a year or two. Yeah. And that may sound like, look, well, but I need to get a job in 6 months. You can work the jobs you have. You can find other things to make ends meet for a while, and you can just slow down and put in time over a longer period of time. And there are several reasons why I recommend this. First, it doesn't seem daunting if you make it a routine and you're just doing it every day. You don't really even think about it that much, right? Every day you have to brush your teeth. Every day you have to, probably take a shower or a bath or something. And if you think about the crushing weight of, thousands, you're going to take 20,000 more baths in your life. Oh, isn't that intimidating to think about? But if you think, I'm just going to take, a quick bath, it'll take 10, 15 minutes, and then I'll be done with my bath for the day, right? That's not that big a deal. Yeah. You can live in these day tight capsules. You can take things one day at a time. And the benefit of doing this, other than not being daunted by the immense task that is learning math, programming, computer science, all these different concepts you need to work as a developer, is that you are not daunted, but you are also putting just a little bit more into your brain every day. Every time you go to sleep, your brain is organizing and structuring that, and you're not going to hit diminishing returns if you're just learning to code for an hour a day. That is why I strongly recommend just making a plan, pacing yourself, and doing it consistently over a longer period of time.
One thing that I've said for a long time, and I agree with you to a very strong degree, because success to me is the culmination of very small, consistent actions. And so for a lot of people, they think, you go 12, 15 hours at a time, jamming this resource down, and then you're good to go. I've often talked about my entry into tech with the tech stack that I had. My entry into tech was with Java and Angular. I started with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I started realizing that a lot of the influences around me were telling me other things like social media and stuff. And so I jumped to Python because I was like, the whole world's using Python, it seems like. Jump into Python. I was in Memphis, Tennessee, and at that time there was 0 Python jobs, like not a single one. And so I spent this time learning Python and Django and Flask, and like nothing was panning out. And so then I was like, oh, a lot of the companies that I want to work for, they were using Java. So I jumped to Java, I learned Spring Framework, and I'm like, oh, I need a front end for this. And I was like, oh, I've completely forgot everything about JavaScript. So I had to go back and relearn it. So even if you spend all this time diving into something without touching it again or using it in some way, shape, or form, you're going to forget that syntax. You're going to forget some of those properties because you're going to get so used to all these other languages and how they use it. Your learning curve to pick it back up will be easier, but without consistency in using it, you're going to forget it. To be honest with you right now, I haven't touched Angular in a while. If I had to, I'd have to like redo some stuff or like refresh some memory because I really don't remember a lot of it since I've been so entrenched in React for so long. But I know I could pick it up. For me, when it comes to like how do you figure out where to invest, I always come back to the same thing. And I know we've already said this in a podcast episode, but it's like auditing your local market to see where the opportunities are. If you spend all day long learning the MERN stack, it's a cool stack. But if you're in an area where everyone's like, hey, we need PHP developers and we're paying like 150 grand a year, you're doing yourself a disservice by not learning that demand that they need. Or if you're in an area like we're in Dallas, Texas right now, right? In Dallas, Texas, Java is king. But in Memphis, Tennessee, .NET was king. So in Dallas, if you know Java and you can get in a company, you've got job security. You've got a lot of opportunities. A prime example with our Meetup group, we were doing some research a while ago, and a lot of them had MERN stack because they came out of boot camps and stuff like that. And with the MERN stack, we were looking and we found like 2,000 jobs in all of Dallas, right? But when we looked at Java and Spring, we found 34,000. So it's like, are you going to compete against all the available MERN stack developers? And it's not even guaranteed it's MERN stack. It's just we found Node as the backend language for these organizations.
Yeah.
Or are you going to go with Java and then have a bulk of opportunities where you don't feel like you're fighting people for it?
I'm curious how much this kind of plays into freeCodeCamp, right? So this idea of kind of learning kind of being a daily practice, and there's a lot of real kind of learning theory behind that, right? Spaced repetition, active recall is amazing for how adults' brains learn best through trauma, right? You touch the hot plate, your hand gets burnt, you don't touch the hot plate again. But after that, it's spaced repetition, active recall, and being able to identify like what's going in your local area. It's Java. I'm going to go to freeCodeCamp. I'm going to learn the Java track. One of the things that we always bring up is that you can get writing code in the first 30 seconds, which is beautiful. But how much of that intentionality about like how folks learn, how they go through the process, how they continue to come back to freeCodeCamp, is that something you think about in the platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So I studied journalism and I worked at local newspapers before I, eventually became a teacher and a school director and then ultimately a software engineer and then starting freeCodeCamp. And one of the most important concepts in journalism is the concept of an inverted pyramid. Mm-hmm. And the notion is that you're giving people the most important stuff right off the bat, the stuff that is most broadly applicable, and then you're gradually tapering into the more esoteric but still useful stuff that is likely to come up in job interviews and things like that. And so I do think that there are a lot of early easy wins that you can have. Mm-hmm. There are 7 technologies that I think everybody should learn, frankly, regardless of whether they're even going to be a developer, but definitely if they're going to be a developer and not just like a tech adjacent role, I would recommend everybody learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Python, Linux, SQL, Git. If you learn those 7 technologies, which are all open source, they're all 20 plus years old, they're not going anywhere. And there's this effect called the Lindy effect, where basically the longer something has existed, the longer it's likely to exist. Right? Think about baseball, right? In the United States. Baseball has been around for it's been widely played for probably at least like 120, 130 years. It's not going anywhere. Our grandkids will still probably be playing baseball, right? Because it's existed so long, it's just less likely to go away quickly. And I think the same thing is true with a lot of these core technologies. Now, what Danny's saying, C++ or the C# .NET ecosystem, the Java ecosystem, it could be that Ruby on Rails is really popular in your ecosystem, or it could be like Python, Django stack, or it could be that everybody's using Flutter for something, right? Flutter and Dart. That is certainly something that you should tailor your knowledge to, But I still encourage people to learn those 7 fundamental tools first, because you're almost certainly going to use all 7 of those tools. And those will give you kind of the nuts and bolts that you can use to make associations with newer tools that you learn. And you'll notice that none of the things I mentioned were frameworks.
Yeah.
I don't think you necessarily even need frameworks when you're learning. You can just pick up frameworks, and frameworks will make it easier to not have to do a lot of the things you've already learned how to do manually. But by learning how to do things manually, you know what's actually happening under the hood, and you can appreciate like a whole different range of, errors and edge cases that would not necessarily be obvious to somebody who had only learned using frameworks.
Yeah.
So yeah, like a more nuts and bolts approach.
I'm curious because, I had a very similar take. As of late, it's altered and it's shifted a little bit because I feel like the frameworks have grown so much that it's not like a small layer on top now. It's almost like learning a whole new language. Like when it comes to React, and I've got to take on this, I've been on the record saying this, I feel like we've increased the difficulty for beginners getting into React because we removed Create React App from the documentation and it immediately jumped into Next. And so now it's like, you don't even know what's going on, especially if you've never touched React before. You're so confused to trying to get something up and running. There's so much involved there. And like you have to learn about what's pages and routing and this and that. Yeah. It's like a whole new set of tools on top of everything. Going through JavaScript, for example, and then jumping into React and Next and all these other tools because the vendor lock-in, and then you're trying to figure out Vercel in that regard. It's a lot that's on top of it. It's not as easy or simple as websites used to be. Does it really make sense? Or is there really inherent value to learn it the hard way that no one in the industry is even using just to have appreciation for it?
Well, I mean, a lot of this comes down to what your expectations for employment are. Like if you are, frankly, deluding yourself into thinking you're going to be able to get a job quickly, I don't think it's likely that you're going to be able to get a job within 6 months if you're self-teaching.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
I think it's going to be like an 18-month to 24-month process before you're really ready. And you can certainly start applying. Before then, there's a saying, like, if you wait until you feel ready, you probably should have started a lot longer, a lot earlier. But, if you take the time to learn things properly, then you don't have all these gaps in your knowledge. It's much harder when you're working as a React dev and something's breaking, and now suddenly you have to go and actually look at the underlying code, and you're not conditioned to be, you haven't had like a holistic training on this, and suddenly you're out of your depth, and like those cracks come up all the time. When I learned to code, and this is a do as I say, not as I do, like when I learned to code, I got my first Ruby on Rails job about 9 months into learning to code. And granted, that was before zero percentage interest rates went away, and before like the pandemic overhiring and then mass layoffs that resulted in like kind of a glut of people looking for engineering roles. It was a lot easier to get a job as a developer in 2011 than it is right now. But I would say that I had a lot of difficulty because I was learning these fundamental skills, and then I kind of like almost kind of lucked into getting a job as a Rails dev, and I hadn't finished my fundamental education, so I struggled throughout that entire role, just not understanding how C libraries that were underpinning Ruby worked, and not necessarily understanding Ruby itself that well, because Rails is like a framework that sits on top and uses Ruby, but there's so much that it does for you. Yeah. So I would just caution people to take the time to actually learn how things work. And that's certainly the approach we take with freeCodeCamp. Like, yeah, we definitely teach React. We teach Next.js. We teach all these different things, but we try to teach a lot of fundamentals first so that people, at the very least, you can appreciate all the things that, React and Next are doing for you. And yes, it's true that it would be very difficult to implement in vanilla JavaScript a lot of the things you can do with a more powerful framework like Next.js. It's almost certainly possible to do that, but you'd probably take a different approach than if you were trying to build like an entire framework that people learned separately, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You said it took 9 months for you to get your first job in Ruby on Rails. How did you end up getting it? Short answer, but like...
Yeah. So if you read my book, if you just Google Learn to Code book, you should see my free book. It's completely free. You can read it in a browser. Or you can listen to me read it in audio book form on the freeCodeCamp podcast feed, episode number 100. We essentially, I won a bunch of hackathons. And I was just going to hackathons every weekend. Like I did 40 hackathons in a year or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And every hackathon was an opportunity to just meet a whole lot of people, build my network, build my reputation, potentially winning these, and build my skills. And that's something I always advocate is build all three of those concurrently. And hackathons are a great way that you can do that. But I had won some, and so even though I didn't really know what I was doing, I was just building these brittle hackathon apps that would collapse right after the demo ended, ideally, and not during the demo. I didn't understand like good design principles. I didn't know how to build robust software that addressed a whole lot of edge cases. I certainly didn't know a lot about like accessibility and performance and things like that. But I could get this quick and dirty thing together and get up on stage and present it, and then potentially win. And as a result, that was kind of the proof of concept in me as a dev. And then I, talked to the CTO, I talked to the engineering manager, and I got through the interview process. And there was no whiteboard coding involved in that because they just looked at my hackathon wins and assumed, like, this guy knows what he's doing, even though I didn't really know what I was doing. And that's how I got the job. It was just like a small rail shop doing like, product-oriented startup that was like maybe Series B, Series C.
Y'all hear him? And I'm saying this intentionally. I had a feeling that was the answer, by the way. I didn't know the exact thing. I should have probably listened to that podcast episode, so I will do that today, actually. But there's a specific reason why I asked that, because we all agree it is harder to get a job now than it was in previous years. Yeah. But I think people learn how to code now. They think it's like, oh, y'all just knew the basics and you were already employed? Hell nah. Like, I have a collage that I put out. The first year I was trying to get into tech, it took me 9 months as well, which is a crazy time. Yeah. I didn't know that about you. So,
we're
twins.
Probably both outliers.
Yeah. But I went to 52 meetups in those 9 months, networking and talking to folks, trying to get my name out there and really just show them that I can do something, right? Networking existed back then, it exists now, and that was a big factor into getting those opportunities. And that's one thing where when I'm trying to help people, they refuse to network or they don't know how to network. And by the way, again, we're recording this right after the Commit Your Code conference, right? But so many people came up to me, speakers of like high caliber, and people that were there for my keynote where we were talking about how you should network at this conference. One person came up to me, amazing human being, Joel Hooks. For those that don't know him, I highly recommend researching him. Dude's amazing. But he literally said, you're making a little army, because I've never had so many juniors and even seniors come up to me in a similar fashion, but I learned so much about them within 30 seconds that we were having conversations. And one person in particular, and I won't say who they went up to, but they went up to a very, very high executive of a top-level bank that was at the conference. And within 2 minutes, that person fell in love with them so much that they're now giving them one-on-one mentoring sessions. That didn't happen because they just walked up saying, can you please mentor me? They had a conversation and they treated themselves as, what I say, you're valuable. They saw so much value that they ended up wanting to mentor them. And so that, it kind of, I really just want to emphasize it, because people are like, well, you learned how to code 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. No.
Yeah, it was about 15 years ago.
Old, man. We're old, man.
Yeah,
but,
I'm in my 40s, dude.
But it worked then, and it still works in today's market, because a lot of the people that we're seeing get jobs now, they're doing that exact same thing. And it's via that networking aspect.
Yeah. The magic hasn't changed. It was still hard work then. It's still hard work now. But I guess, what have you been seeing change, especially when folks are trying to learn and where you think things might be going?
Well, I've seen people like, I think it's result of people thinking it's basically impossible to get a developer job right now, and it's not.
Yeah.
It's certainly possible, and I talk to developers all the time who get new jobs, both more senior people that are able to like do lateral transfers or find advanced, like to find jobs above where they are currently. There are still a lot of companies hiring. Of course, it's very frustrating the way that the companies are hiring. They're like leaving these LinkedIn posts up, and maybe they're just trying to collect resumes and they're not actually interviewing people. There's lots of shadiness going on from the employer's perspective. But there are lots of opportunities out there, but there's the perception. The word on the street is you can't get a developer job anymore. People are going and like studying real estate and stuff like that instead, because they're like, well, there isn't a future in coding, or it's all going to be automated or whatever. But as a result of all that, a lot of the kind of fair weather learn to code people have gotten kind of shaken out of the field. And it's just like the really serious, like diligent, more patient planning people that are in it. And as a result, like there's less hype for certain. And when the hype kind of sizzles off, then you've got just the people that were in it for the long term and who are willing to, work at a grocery store, work fast food, or work doing a variety of different like jobs that I would consider menial that I've done myself. I worked at Taco Bell for like a year and a half. I worked at a grocery store mopping the floor at 6 a.m. and stuff, opening up the place. I wouldn't want to be working those jobs now that I'm in my 40s. That wouldn't be very fun. But people are willing to do those jobs for another year or two if it means that they can invest in their skills, which is free, basically. You can listen to podcasts like this for free. Mm-hmm. You can read books for free. You can check them out from the library, and freeCodeCamp publishes technical books that are freely available. And, you can basically just keep your day job and work, pay for your bills, and just grind an hour or two a day. And over time, you are going to have progress. And so what I've seen is just an increase in the volume of those people who are in it for the longer term and are not just jumping from one technology to another and like trying to ride hype cycles and stuff like that, but are genuinely just like, okay, let's focus on the core fundamental skills. Like I've been kind of like advocating for learning those fundamental skills for a long time. I've been advocating for taking your time, even as people are like, seeing ads in every Google result for like learn to code in 9 weeks, type boot camps and things like that. And I'm glad that like most of the people that are left learning to code have kind of taken that almost as a given that like it is a lot of work. It's not easy. Because I feel like there was a period in time where there were a lot of marketers that were trying to paint this as an easy job that you didn't necessarily need to have any skills. You didn't need to be disciplined or anything like that. You can just go, and it's the boot camp. The drill sergeant is going to make sure that you learn the things you need. And then there's just like a golden ticket waiting for you on the desk on your way out the door, And I never believed that. And it's very, you do occasionally meet people like that, that we're able to, through a series of luck or through just being really good at other dimensions of getting jobs. As I said, the skills, the reputation, the network. If you are really good at networking and if you can get like a reputation, your skills don't necessarily have to be as strong, but you do probably have to have a baseline so that your stool doesn't collapse the second somebody steps on the skills part of it, right?
Absolutely, right? You said this idea of if you can get these skills, and if you can get these skills in anything less than the traditional pathway, which is 4 to 5 years, right? You're winning. 4 to 5 years is what folks that are going to go through a CS program are going to take to kind of get into the industry to do this. And so if you're able to acquire these skills, move into the industry, and you did it in that less time, you're doing phenomenally well. And I think people forgot that, especially when the hype cycle were going 12 get your job in 12 weeks, things like that. And so I guess one of the things I'm really, really interested in is this idea of alternative pathways that aren't that 4 to 5 year cycle, that aren't that traditional pathway into tech, and understanding kind of what made you think to build these other pathways for folks that are trying to learn.
Yeah. Fundamentally, college is way too expensive. Mm-hmm. I've long been an advocate of figuring out a way to make college free. Yeah. You do have free university in some European countries, but it's kind of regressive in the sense that everybody's paying tax and then the government's like subsidizing college for usually more well-to-do people that are able to get tutoring and pass the admission tests and stuff like that. But if you just, don't have any needs testing and you just make university free across the board, I think 90% of people's like anti-intellectual or like anti-ivory tower sentiment will dissipate. People will just be like, hey, this is great, free college, right? I meet people all the time who are angry about college, but it's not necessarily about the fact that college exists or that you can go and learn these skills, but it's that it's expensive and it's exclusionary, because a lot of people can't afford to go to college. And, California's done an amazing job with the community college system there. It's one of the most impressive aspects of higher education in the world, frankly. The fact that you can pay, $1,000 or something like that and get an entire semester of like, practically university quality. Often the teachers at community colleges are better than the teachers at research universities because they're focused on teaching. They're not focused on getting, papers published and stuff like that. But not everybody lives in California and has access to those community colleges, and the community colleges in other parts of the United States, it's spotty. And a lot of people live in countries where they basically punted on higher education and just have a lot of funds to send kids to the U.S. because the U.S. is, one of the best higher education systems in the world. But not everybody has that luxury of being born with a U.S. passport and being able to attend U.S. university and have in-state tuition and stuff like that. And even here in the United States, like the place where I grew up, Oklahoma City, I think probably half of the people, maybe more, at the high school that I went to didn't end up going to college because it's just a lot of money, and you can go and you can work as a trucker, you can work, you can do trades, or you can just work as a server at a restaurant and make the same amount of money that a lot of people who studied what I studied in University of Liberal Arts were making after they got their degree. So it disincentivized college for a lot of people. And I learned to code by myself, like basically just using books, using free online resources, watching like Stanford video courses that they published and things like that. And I was able to learn to code for free, and it was messy and it took a long time and there was a lot of ambiguity. But I thought, okay, well, what if we just had like a really clear, cohesive, like thoughtfully orchestrated curriculum that people could use, and then they can use that and learn to code. And then they don't have to cobble together a bunch of other resources. They don't have to pay anybody money. They can ideally do it at their own pace. So if they're busy, they can just do it whenever time permits. And so what emerged was, if you want to extend access to learning to as many people as possible, you make it free, you make it completely self-paced, you make it very data light in the sense that even if you don't have a laptop, which a lot of people don't have laptops, they just have to learn on their phone. You don't have a whole lot of data on your phone. You don't want to be downloading, 1080p videos and watching them. You want to be able to like potentially code on your phone and learn without any of those different requirements, without those restrictions. So there was like, at the end of the day, it was about access and extending access to as many people. And that's why freeCodeCamp exists, because I was frustrated that education was expensive, and I've always felt that it should be free and that it's a fundamental human right. And so freeCodeCamp was really just born out of frustration more than anything.
Well, let me ask you this, and you kind of touched on it a little bit too, that now, especially, a lot of people like that are trying to learn how to code, or maybe their earlier career. They feel like, oh, if I can't get a job in 6 months, I've missed the gravy train. Yeah. This thing is over with. And often I've told people, even previously, I've only met one person in real life that has landed a job in tech from the first line of code to the first, they received company property to work at the place in 3 months. Everyone else, it's been significantly longer, right? Yeah. And I get the whole adage, 3 months, 90 days, everybody kind of hyped that up. But what do you say to somebody who's like, I can't land a job in tech in 6 months, or even some of the tweets I get hit in, I need to land a job by December. I need to land a job by March. Yeah. But often I've said, if you didn't stumble on learning how to code, would you have that same timeline on yourself to switch your career into something else? Would you be that hard on yourself? But they feel almost demoralized that they can't get it within 6 months. Yeah. I mean, I would just say, go get a job at Starbucks, get a job at McDonald's. Like, just get whatever job you can that will pay the rent. And if you can't pay the rent, like, try to find a roommate, just cut your costs as low as you absolutely can. And I say this as a teacher who tried to save like half of my earnings. And that's what I used to build freeCodeCamp. Like I had like $150,000 saved after like 10 years of working. And that's basically the startup capital for freeCodeCamp, which is a charity, of course. So I don't own any equity or anything, but that's what I put into it to help try to get, escape velocity so that we could actually run as a sustainable organization. And we got there, we got tax exempt status and everything, but not to talk about myself, to talk about that person, what would I say to them? I would just say, look, why do you need to get a job in 6 months? Why do you need to try to rush this? Because if you can just work a normal job, and there are openings at these jobs that are not sexy, but they do pay the bills, and they are, fairly dignified work. It's not like you're going to be like breaking rocks in some gulag or something. Like, you're actually doing work that is grueling, and I've done it myself. I worked at Taco Bell, took the drive-through orders at 4 a.m. from extremely stoned people. I've done like all the thankfulness jobs of like putting the cardboard boxes in the big trash compactor
in the back of the grocery store and stuff like that. I mean, these jobs kind of suck, but you're living in the 21st century where it's not like you're working construction. And I have worked construction. I did demolition for 1 week. I could not do that any longer. That was the worst job I've ever had. And I did telemarketing too. That was the second worst job. But, you're not necessarily putting yourself in physical danger like a lumberjack would or something like that. You can have this kind of okay, mediocre, like you watch these TV shows and they lampoon it, right? Like you watch Office Space and the people hate their jobs, but their jobs are like way better than any jobs during the early Industrial Revolution era would have been. It's not that bad. So my humble advice would just be keep your costs low, save as much money as you can, live well within your means. And I understand that may sound very privileged, but like see if you can figure out a way to make it work, and then take your time. And being able to take your time and having that luxury of time is going to be such a game changer for you, because realistically, there's no way you're getting a developer job from a cold start in 6 months. You're deluding yourself.
Well, you said, why do I need to get a job within 6 months? Devil's advocate, Quincy Larson, founder of freeCodeCamp, host of the freeCodeCamp podcast, and has helped millions of people change their lives. Yeah. I've been working so hard to get something that people told me that I could get, and I haven't seen anything come to light in what I'm trying to make happen. There's no actual path. For example, if you want to be a doctor, you pass the board exams, you get your certification, you get hired at a hospital, you're a doctor. You want to be a lawyer, you pass the bar, boom, you're a lawyer. There's none of that for tech, but if I get a CS degree, that has some proof that I can possibly get in there. But then even then, nowadays, if you get a CS degree, there's no guarantee that you get a job, right? So I've been working so hard to get this thing. That's why I want to get that job within that time period.
First of all, we are very fortunate that the software engineering field does not have the barrage of regulation that doctors and lawyers have. I know tons of lawyers who can't get a good job. Tons of lawyers who are working basically making like a fraction of what they thought they were going to make going into expensive law programs. I know doctors that are working in corporate hospitals where they're basically just treated as a cog in a machine, and their job is miserable, and their compensation is a fraction of what physicians were making back in the 90s, right? Like, it's not like the grass is greener on the other side, although it can certainly appear that way. And there are people in any field that have, pretty good success. And certainly software engineering, for every software engineer you see that's working at Google and drinking the free coffee and having the fancy lunch, there's some software engineer working at a bank, just wiring and duct taping together a bunch of old APIs from like the 70s, this is not going to solve all your problems. This is not a fantasy land. You're merely taking the first step, getting your first job, into a progression within a career. And it's not like you won and this is the finish line. Yeah. I mean, you're really you're getting to the starting line. And it's not like the starting line for the big race is like on your front door and you're racing immediately. A lot of times it takes time to go over to the finish line or to the starting line and stretch and get ready to actually start running the race. So I would just say, don't feel entitled. Like, if you ever feel like entitled to a job, or you feel like just because you put in this work, you are owed a job, you're not owed really anything, unfortunately, in the United States. I think everybody should be owed free healthcare, free education, free childcare, things like that. Like, I believe very strongly in those things, because I think those are just table stakes if you want to have a healthy society. And you can look at like Sweden and places like that, and how people live free from fear and create like some of the best music in the world, right? Like, some of the most prolific songwriters are in Sweden. How do they get there? Because they have like this nice social safety net that we don't have in the US, and they can go and pursue their passion without fear of getting cancer and basically just dying because they can't afford the treatment and stuff. Right? Like Breaking Bad, if that took place in the US, it would be one episode long, and he'd get his cancer diagnosis, and then they say, all right, go pick up this prescription. When instead he was a teacher, and he had to go and could have committed a bunch of crimes so he could pay for his chemotherapy. Yeah. So, that's just that's a huge part of it. But we do live in the U.S. If you're listening to this, maybe you live in a place that's even rougher than the U.S., right? Like, I have tons of friends who live in India, Nigeria, places like that, where there's even less of a social net than there is here. And just my humble advice would be just take a moment to appreciate the situation and understand that like nobody's coming to save you. You've got to save yourself, and you need to be realistic in how you're going to progress. Don't delude yourself. Nobody benefits. You do not benefit from pretending that there's some sort of like finish line and that there's a happily ever after you get that first job, because you really you're at the beginning still.
And there's something about this too that has hints that kind of drives me absolutely wild, and it's the concept of free, right? And so when folks are trying to learn, they're trying to grasp onto this route of like, how do I go from zero? How do I find this like pathway to success? They think they have to do this thing, and they have all this like ambition, motivation in the beginning. So I'm going to buy all these courses. I'm going to spend all this money. And once I spend all this money, then I'll have the correct path. I'll have the way that I'm going to break into tech. And so I think all the things you're advocating for, like setting your life up, setting yourself up to be in a place where you can study. And then one of the interesting things that I see is just, oh, I'm going to go spend $1,000 on Black Friday to get all these courses. And once I have all these courses, then I'll be in a place where I can actually get the things I want to get done. And so one of the things I've always found beautiful is that it's free. And I'm curious what you think about people's perception of quality, perception of like the route that it's going to be successful for them. Do you get pushback on that?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this all day. You get what you pay for, sometimes a whole lot less. But that is conventional wisdom, right? At the same time, it feels really good to buy a book at the bookstore because it feels like you also bought the time to read that book, and you bought the energy to read that book. But you just have some atoms, some dead tree you're carrying around in your shopping bag. You're probably going to put it on a shelf, and maybe you'll read it, you know. But I mean, you could have just gone to the library and got it. Why didn't you get it at the library, right? But there is a lot of really good free stuff out there. I mean, Stanford, MIT, Harvard, they're publishing tons of free courses on math, programming, computer science as well. Yeah. Do you think that those are like not worth anything just because they're free? FreeCodeCamp is free because we're a tax-exempt public charity that's supported by donors, and a whole bunch of chill human beings have subsidized you being able to use it for free. So somebody else is paying for it. You know, there's no free lunch. Somebody else is paying for it, right? I paid for it $150,000 of my hard-earned teacher savings initially to keep the organization up and pay for servers and pay for people to help me build out the code base and the curriculum and stuff. And so I would not consider the actual price as and I think that's probably got to change, like people looking at things and evaluating them based on the price. I think that really breaks down in a lot of areas. Yeah. So I would just encourage you to you can listen to incredible music just walking down the street. If you're in like Brooklyn or somebody's busking, right? You can hear incredible music playing. You didn't pay anything for that. Does that devalue the performance that you're witnessing? No.
Yeah.
Right? Does it devalue the free event that you went to at the public library? Oh, this isn't worth anything. I didn't pay any money to get in. Like, I understand that this is America. This is like the capitalistic core of the world. And I can see how people are skeptical, like nothing comes for free. I hear that all the time. People who are skeptical of FreeCodeCamp because like they just have been conditioned to think like if you're not paying for it, like why would somebody actually be charitable? Why there is no altruism. There are people out there who genuinely believe there's no such thing as altruism, and everybody's got this agenda, and they're just going to hook you, and then they're going to figure out a way to bilk you, right? That sort of like cynicism is unfortunate, but within every cynicism, if you scratch them, you'll find a disappointed idealist. That is a George Carlin quote.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a cynical man, but he was very idealistic as well, and I can definitely understand where that's coming from. People who've been burned too many times. People who've been scammed. I've been scammed before. Yeah. I've bought stuff that is counterfeit and I didn't realize it. That sucks. But if you let your guard down a little bit and you look out there and you take some things at face value and you learn, oh, it's a 501c3 public charity. That's why it's free. Yeah. And then you can kind of like stop dismissing it. And I think the quality of FreeCodeCamp, we've been working very hard to make it as rigorous as possible. I think, if it hasn't already approached the median quality of like a computer science degree at a public, U.S. university, it's going to reach that, and it's probably going to pass that within the next few years with the amount of work we're doing, and it'll still be free even when the universities are charging $5,000 a semester or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good point to start wrapping this up and getting to the segment of
Sure.
Ask Danny and Leon, or Ask Leon and Danny. Did we ever decide what we're going to call that? Ask Danny and Leon, or Ask Leon and Danny. And this week it's Ask Quincy, Danny, and Leon, or
Yeah.
Ask Quincy, Leon, and Danny. And the question came in, and I think it's actually a really good question to kind of segue in since you're here in regards to freeCodeCamp. And that is, so I'm molding the question a little bit just because you're here, and I think it would be valuable in that regard. But the question is, what do you believe people should be looking forward to in regards to learning AI? Should they be adopting it? Not the AI tool itself, but actually working with AI tooling to build LLMs and things like that. And does freeCodeCamp have any thing on their track besides making a video, but maybe releasing actual course material in regards to like building your own LLMs?
Yeah. So building your own LLM is somewhat technical. Like you probably want to be a machine learning engineer. Of course, you can just grab like off-the-shelf libraries and train. So to answer the machine learning question, we're building a machine learning curriculum.
Nice.
We already have a lot, like you're learning a whole bunch of Python, you're learning a bunch of math, programming, computer science, and then you're learning some Python, and then you're learning how neural networks work and stuff like that. And actually, if you go on YouTube and you just start searching for different like machine learning terms, like try machine learning course, generative AI course, PyTorch course, TensorFlow course. Like you're going to get freeCodeCamp as one of the top results for pretty much anything you can think of. Vector databases, retrieval augmented generation, like anything, right? We are publishing a ton of courses on this, but it is a more advanced topic. And I don't think that for all the hype in AI, I don't think that like just knowing how to do this stuff is going to guarantee you a job. A lot of those AI jobs are being filled by people who have PhDs and have published a lot of research papers and stuff. Like if you want to get a job at OpenAI, working on their models, or if you want to get a job on the Google Gemini team, most of those people are mid-career or they have a PhD, right? Like I do think it's a lot easier to get a role in like web development and learn the fundamentals for that, and then gradually work your way into that machine learning engineer type role.
Do you see that being the same? Do you see that being the same situation for the next 5 years?
Probably. I mean, it's difficult to predict what's going to happen over the next 5 years. I do think that. So here are I'll throw a couple variables. We have no idea whether like LLMs are going to continue to make the significant gains they're making. We have no idea whether open source. They're not really open source. They're open weight. People say open source. It's a misnomer. They're doing it to capitalize on.
I like that term.
Mark Zuckerberg's llama is not open source. It is open weight. Stop, stealing our glory as open source projects, right? Because if they actually made it open source, we'd know exactly what training data went into it, and we would know that is a whole bunch of copyrighted material, including a whole bunch of freeCodeCamp articles and blog posts. I'm almost certain that that's in a lot of the training in Copilot and probably in Llama, and definitely in both Claude and GPT-4. So, and we've seen tons of bot traffic as people like basically use our corpus of articles to train their models, which does violate our terms of service, by the way. Don't do that, please. But what are we going to go and sue Google? Right. Yeah, we're not. I know I'm tipping our hand a little bit. If any Googlers are listening, can we take freeCodeCamp's corpus of 12,000 plus tutorial articles and full length books and like all this rich, text that is like basically the oil in the oil rush. Everybody needs oil for industrialization, and the industrialization is training these LLMs. I digress. So that is one of them. Open weight, is that going to catch up with proprietary? Are the benchmarks? And I've talked to Yifan Mai, who's at Stanford, who's a researcher who runs the Helm project, and they benchmark LLMs. He's not sure. So, and then the third question is, what applications are there really going to be for these? So is it going to improve? Are the open weight ones going to be able to compete? And are the applications really going to appear, or are what we're already seeing, like the ability to potentially take an image and like expand it and, add information that wasn't there, generative AI, or the ability to, how useful is it going to be to have essentially like a half of a junior dev who's sitting on your desk whom you can ask questions to in the form of like a chat-based interface? I don't know. And if these products plateau, or if open weight is good enough, or if at some point like let's say Llama gets good enough that you're just hosting it on your own server and you've got your own thing and it's just a feature and people use it occasionally, I'm not sure that there's going to be a huge job boon there. And if it's a solved thing, if the models are good enough, then why build better models?
Yeah.
Like if there's dramatically diminishing returns because it costs a fortune to train a model.
Do you want to answer it?
No, I think that's a beautiful kind of way to start kind of thinking about like this idea of AI coming in to the place here and how does it kind of reach that next step. So I think when you bring up the weights versus the open source piece, that's something wonderful to think about. I also think about, all right, if it does come, what does that change? How long does it take that change to happen? And I think one of the things we had a little chance to talk about yesterday is, all right, there's so many places that are going to need to implement these changes, that are going to need to take this AI that's coming in, and there's going to be thousands and thousands of businesses that need to incorporate this to change how they order pizza, change how they book appointments. And as someone who's in the space and learning, if you learn the skills that helps them people apply that AI, you still have a job for a very long time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I don't want people to think that, hey, just because AI is here, we don't know where it's going to go. We don't know if it'll keep progressing. But even if it did and it was ready right now, there's still so much opportunity that you need to incorporate that. And yeah, I just think I don't like when people get an excuse to not learn.
Yeah.
And this seems like one of those really big excuses that people could use. And I think it'd be the shame of the century if you held yourself back from a career that we have all seen and benefited from, that's changed our lives, from doing construction to lifting heavy boxes to working it. Like it has such a fundamental way to change your life. And please don't take this as just another excuse to like have that change happen.
Yeah, I have a theory, and I want to say that I am the type of person that tries to see all the good and all the bad, right? I try to think of all the worst case scenarios and stuff, and I have a theory when it comes to this whole boom with AI tooling like ChatGPT, Claude, etc., all these LLM tools. And my theory is this: I believe ChatGPT truly believed, and OpenAI truly believed that they would have some competition. I don't think they thought it was going to be to the level that it is now. And I distinctly remember Sam Altman saying one time where he's like, it's completely okay if somebody makes their own model. They will never be able to catch up to us. Everyone's caught up.
Yeah.
And so I think now we're in a situation where all these organizations have spent all these billions to build these tools, to get them to these levels, to accelerate growth. And now everyone is like, dang, we have built a tool that's going to be really hard to monetize.
Yeah.
And like, I remember having a conversation with YK Sugi, who, incredible human being. He works for SourceGraph. And we were talking about this. And he was like, I'm at a stage now where I used to pay for ChatGPT $20 a month. And I used to pay for this other tool $20 a month. He's like, but now I'm at a point where it's like, it doesn't make sense to pay anything for these tools anymore. And he's canceled all his subscriptions for AI tooling. Yeah. And so my theory now, because I had a very similar theory, which I will say off the podcast, because I am not opening this Pandora's box on the podcast. But my theory is I have a feeling that these tools are going to basically hurt Google's search engine and Bing search engine for whatever it is and all these other search engines that basically are search engines with the purpose of serving you ads. And my theory is I will not be shocked if you start opening up ChatGPT and start seeing related information that are advertisements to businesses in regards to that search. Because I think that is going to be the next wave, because it's, especially with Apple Intelligence, which is basically, let's be real, ChatGPT in a wrapper. And they're going to have all that there on every single device. How could they not implement some kind of ad tooling in there to make all those millions and billions? I just see it as an ad serving tool within the next few years.
Yeah. One thing I'll add to that, especially to build on what Leon said, is if it just becomes something where there's an API and you integrate it and you send a get LLM response function and something, and it gives you the response, and then you have the payload that you're serving with your Next.js app. I mean, that's just web development, right? Like, you don't need to have machine learning engineering skills to be able to use an LLM API.
Yeah.
And Sean Wang, Swix, he basically coined the term AI engineering, or he certainly popularized it. And he argues that like 90% of working with AI is just web dev, and then knowing a little bit more conceptually about how LLMs work and prompting them which LLM approach to use for what best results and things like that. And so it doesn't really change fundamentally much about what you're probably already learning as you teach yourself coding. And it doesn't fundamentally change the FreeCodeCamp core curriculum a whole lot. Yes, we're adding a machine learning engineering program. We're actually going to add an entire certification track. It's going to be mostly just learning a whole lot of Python and learning a bunch of math, because that's what AI is.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't really fundamentally change a lot of that stuff, then you don't really need to worry about it. Like, nobody knows whether the models are going to plateau or whether we're going to have AGI, as the hype men say. Nobody knows whether the open source models are going to catch up. The open weight models, sorry. I mean, like, you listen to the New York Times podcast or something like that, and they call it open source AI, and it's not. The open weight models. And then nobody knows whether the third thing I said, what was the third thing? I listed those three things.
Yeah.
Nobody knows whether those are going to come to pass. And I don't think it really matters if you're just trying to learn to code. I think what this is a trap.
Yeah.
This is a trap where you demotivate yourself by thinking, there's no way I can learn all this stuff. It's too hard to become a developer. I don't have time to get a PhD in machine learning or mathematics or stats or something so I can work as a dev. I'm out, and people who are piecing out on software development because, one, they think AI is going to take the job or automate the job away. First of all, I've never talked to an experienced software engineer who believes that, and I've talked with a lot of experienced software engineers. They all think AI has boosted their productivity about 20%. And I would say that, like, even though I use AI all day long, every day, probably about 20% productivity improvement as a result. So I don't think it dramatically should factor into your planning. You can just wait and see how it unfolds while you focus on learning fundamental skills that are definitely not going to be replaced.
Yeah.
And I say definitely, I genuinely think that you can write way better JavaScript than some LLM that's trained on a bunch of like Stack Overflow threads and stuff.
Y'all, that is a wrap on the episode. In case you need to know, I'm Danny Thompson. I'm Director of Technology at a company called This.Labs.
I'm Leon Noel, Managing Director of Engineering for Resilient Coders and Community Member at 100 Devs.
I'm Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freecodecamp.org.
And is there anything that you want to plug or share, or maybe something that people need to check out if they haven't already?
Just open up Google and type Learn to Code book, and you should see my book in the results, and click on it and read it.
Dang.
What a baller. Cheers.
SEO doesn't know him, he knows them. Dang. Wow, that's crazy. Okay, yeah, so and I will say this, I've said this for years, I will say this again. I don't think there'd be a Danny Thompson on this podcast if it wasn't for FreeCodeCamp. There wouldn't have been a Commit Your Code conference if it wasn't for FreeCodeCamp. There wouldn't be Danny Thompson at This.Labs or any other organization if it wasn't for FreeCodeCamp. It genuinely was the start of my amazing journey. It changed my life. And to be honest, I don't think if I landed on that website that day, I would have stuck with it. And I know you're a big inspiration to Leon as well.
The things I do in life, the way I move, the way I think is inspired by you and all the hard work you've done.
For real.
And so I can't thank you enough for what you did and continue to do for so many folks.
I will overwhelmingly say this, that, and I believe this, motivation and inspiration have expiration dates, they expire. And if you don't act on your motivation and replace it with something else, which is like the commitment to what you're doing, it disappears. And while I had that motivation, FreeCodeCamp popped up. Within 90 seconds, I wrote my first line of code. Within a week, I got the first, well, actually 2 weeks, I hit the first app that confused the hell out of me, which is the calculator app. And I toiled and toiled and toiled. And that was the start of something amazing. And so if there's ever a way we can support you, we will always be there. If there's a way we can scream your names from the mountaintops, I'll probably have to be airlifted. I ain't climbing no mountain. But I'll get up there. Dang, I lost my voice in that. I'll get up there and I'll scream for you. So please, Quincy Larson, understand, you are the GOAT to us.
The GOAT.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much for
gentlemen.
being the very first guest ever on the Programming Podcast.
Hey,
Thank
let's
you.
go.